Do you boys like melancholy? No? Yeah, me neither. My name is Jackson, but you may know me better as the first person to land on the moon, and today I got my heart broken, specifically by this video that was about Life is Strange, which is a game that I consider to have a huge influence on me in my adolescent life, and I still hold a very special part of that in me to this day. Funny thing about this video is that it's pretty scathing of the game, calling it out for basically the best friend character Chloe being a little bit of a manipulative and a little bit selfish and an annoyingly angsty twat. And the funny thing is, I agree. It's funny because when I first knew about the game, I was like 14. And I was a very young little boy, and I held different opinions, and I was basically a different person back then to then how I am now. And so back then I was a bit less critical of things that I liked. I was just finishing up recording Life is Strange 2 gameplay for this video, because I was going to do a comparison of this one to the first one, and how it's like, oh, the second one isn't as good as the first. But then I watched the video, and my perspective changed. It was so weird. It's hard to deny how just blatant these claims are, and how they make pretty good points, pretty damning points, if you're a big Chloe stan, like a lot of people on Reddit. There's a lot of stans of Life is Strange. You wouldn't believe it, but having two females in the game as leads is pretty freaking popular at the moment. It's just strange. Life is. Because I watched the video, and I felt so weird. Like, there was just this pit in my stomach. I was like, oh my god, he's right. I hate this game now? Where do I stand on this? I guess the point of this intro is that criticism is good, and differing perspectives are also good. Because even if you love something to death, because that's a huge part of your childhood or livelihood or whatever, it's always good to get a second opinion, and I think it's always good to voice whatever you think of a game. This intro is not going as well as I pictured it going. I'm glad I watched that video because it gave me a different perspective on something I already liked, and even though I think more critically on it now, and my perspective is kind of different on that game, I still love it. And I still love Life is Strange 2. Spoiler alert for the end of the video, I still like Life is Strange. Would you believe me? After you're done watching this video, if you'd like, please do go check out his video, because it is incredibly well done, and I have a lot of respect for him. Without further ado, let's jump into the page.
My ass hurts. Fuck, this is really boring.
So one of the things I'd like to get out of the way first regards the pacing of Life is Strange 2. The plot of the first Life is Strange game moved forward quite steadily, with each episode leaving us with a cliffhanger that begged to be answered and motivated me to watch every episode to see how they were concluded. Life is Strange 2 doesn't have that. There's nothing stopping you from playing the first episode and then the last and calling it a decent two-parter, taking away some minor character context. And the episodes this time around average about 3 hours in length, but I don't feel as if the content within each of them is enough to warrant that length in the first place. Each episode can feel bogged down by the inherent lack of exciting events taking place, as the game focuses more towards the relationship between Sean and Daniel. It might not be much of an issue to focus this game more as a character drama rather than centering on telekinesis, but if there isn't this consistent follow-through of a major plot to keep us invested, the episodes from there can either drag on or feel empty entirely. Life is Strange 1 had shorter episodes with a faster moving pace that partitioned tentpole climactic events with slower character-driven moments. Life is Strange 2 has longer episodes, but chooses to lean more into the character-driven side, which means if you aren't already invested in their plot to venture from Seattle to Mexico, then there isn't a whole lot of follow-through in terms of a plot that strings the episodes nicely together. Each episode plays as its own self-contained story, as Sean and Daniel venture from place to place, lending the setting to change each and every time when we see them next. The goal of reaching Mexico feels more blurred in the background, as most of the game has us interact with the folks we meet in between heading out on the road. So things tend to feel more disjointed overall, while it might not bother most as if it were just a self-contained episode. Considering if you were playing the episodes as they were coming out, you'd have to wait like 4 months before the next installment came out. The constant switching of environments and characters added heavily to the discordant feeling of the overall season that many people seem to dislike. Because if there's not much plot to follow, then a lot of the appeal of the game, plus the reason people will stick around episode to episode, will be the characters. And if those same characters don't resonate with the player, then much of the effect of the game is going to become lost on them. And I feel that one of the characters that might prove to be wearing on the player would be Dan.
Come on. We've been inside long enough.
It might be good just to add a disclaimer. I hate kids already. Don't like them. There's little gremlins, which makes Daniel's brattiness extra annoying since he's half of the main cast of characters we're constantly dealing with. There's a point in episode 3 where you and the rest of your weed-trimming buds are collecting their pay, and Sean clearly and explicitly tells Daniel to stay put and not to fuck around with anything. And what does he do? He leaves his post, gets caught, and now none of them get their pay. This pisses me off because it goes just a step too high from, oh, he's a 9-year-old, of course he's adventurous, and of course he makes these mistakes, and of course he wanders around. This time Daniel's brattiness is used as a necessary plot device so the rest of the episode can happen. There is no way, no matter how you've taught him up until this point, that Daniel does not trigger this cutscene, because it needed to happen in order for Finn to get the idea to use Daniel's powers to break into Meryl's and steal back their money. It really makes it hard for me to forgive Daniel, or at the very least let it slide as the big brother, because I don't know if he forgot, we're on the fucking run here. We need that money to go to Puerto Lobos and keep our heads low, and we've told him explicitly not to fucking move, and yet he does. At the very least, they could have made the reason for getting our pay snubbed more realistic and flow better with the plot and the characters, and not this lame excuse to steer everything in a certain direction. Now, there are certain points in the season where Sean and Daniel have a heart-to-heart, where Daniel's bratty qualities are swept to the side for the sake of the moment, which can be nice, which helps with bonding and connecting to them as main characters, but it's hard to forget in an instant how just before Daniel was just being a little dick. Once again, in episode 3, Daniel has a kind of hissy fit with you because Sean is spending more time with the rest of the group and less with him, even though Daniel has fun with the same members of the group as well. It's not as if Daniel's being cut off, as he makes it sound. They're a small group of friends, they're all intermingling. If anything, Daniel's the annoying one again in this scenario because he starts hanging out with Finn almost exclusively and less to Sean. If the little bugger wanted to spend time with Sean, he could just do it, but because Sean is the big brother enforcing rules of harnessing Daniel's powers, he gets all angsty and starts to hang out with Finn mostly just to rub it in our face. I'm really angry. Our reprimanding of Daniel using his powers too frequently or willy-nilly is usually met with a stubborn Daniel, which makes it difficult to continue pursuing this lawful good teaching in him because it feels as though we make no progress. Daniel always acts stubborn when you tell him how to use his powers, especially when you're using them for good, and every single time they have this conversation, it feels like nothing gets done. He just acts bratty, and then they're on their way. Speaking of Daniel's powers, I think that's also a reason that people fell off of this season compared to the first. In Life is Strange 1, giving the main character the powers made players feel more engaged with the plot as it was happening, while giving it to Daniel, a secondary character in Life is Strange 2, displaces the feeling of affecting the plot and doesn't provide that same level of engagement. However, I feel they compensate that with the ability to impact Daniel's decisions later on in the game, while also adding the albeit shallowly explored idea of Sean questioning why he's without powers this time around. But this can feel like a weak substitute, especially when comparing it to the power you held in the first game, but this comes mostly down to player opinion.
Are you having too much fun back there?
What?
That's what I thought.
What? Firstly, I have to praise Don't Nod for implementing what I think is a better choice system than in the previous Life is Strange. Though it doesn't drastically change the plotting of the episodes as much as you'd like, it's more how characters treat you afterwards that takes the spotlight. For instance, I didn't even know that if you chose to steal the tent from the store owners who, kidnapped you, when you arrive to your grandparents in the next episode, they treat you with less kindness and more strictly than if you had done the opposite, which feels pretty dynamic when you realize how differently they would treat you in both scenarios. It's just unfortunate that you don't really get to see this stuff until it's pointed out to you or when you play it a second time. The first go around, this is just how they act towards you, and you are left to presume that this is how they would have treated you anyway. Which brings me to a significant flaw with this choice mechanic in its relation to affecting Daniel. The whole game through, many of your choices entail consequences, good or bad, to either Sean or Daniel that were given the impression will affect the story from that point on. However, this only seems to start coming into play at the end of episode 4. If your choices up until that point led Daniel to having a low morality score, when he's got the Reverend pinned up against the burning church doors, there's a chance that Daniel will just knock her to the side and kill her of his own volition without being affected by the dialogue choices given to you at the present moment. Which I think is super cool because it gives us gratification on how our impressions onto Daniel actually actually have an effect on him. It makes it feel like he has his own independent mind that's constantly growing, and this is only further perpetuated by the end of episode 5, where as Sean, and us as the player, have only two options, surrender or blast through the border, Daniel also has an effect on that final choice. Once you've made yours, Daniel can either agree or disagree with your choice and take control into his own hands, depending on what Daniel's morality level is at. Admittedly, the morality score is a bit cryptic. There isn't much of an indicator as to how high or low his morality is, but there seems to be enough of a buffer to where you have to actively steer him towards one way or the other and not have it chosen by one random mistake. And while these examples of Daniel's effects on the plot are interesting and make for richer gameplay, as I said, it only ever pays dividends in episode 4 onwards. Before that, there is not much to show actively how Daniel is being affected by our teachings. This could be intentional by Don't Nod, that before you have a chance to sway his morality, the outcomes have already come to bite you in the ass, but it really hinders the experience of truly feeling like the player is raising Daniel. Personally, I would have liked to have seen events like these happen as early as episode 2, but for one reason or another, the game doesn't give us these kinds of moments in the earlier episodes. Of course, bratty side characters and the nuanced flaws in an improved choice mechanic could just be my own experiences and opinions, as most of these points are, but one shortcoming I've noticed consistently online from fans of the series find trouble with the lack of connect.
I better go.
No! Please, don't.
An argument I've noticed online for Life is Strange 2 is that the consistent lack of connection to the various side characters we meet on our journey is intentional by the developers. Because you're constantly on the run and hopping from place to place, logically you wouldn't get enough time to connect with everyone or have them tag along on your journey, as the main connection we're meant to make is the bondage between Sean and Daniel. This is another reason why I think people couldn't connect with the second game like they did the first, because in Life is Strange 1, it was a set town with a set amount of characters you got to know that helped build the personality of the world. Because Sean and Daniel are constantly moving and we don't get to see the side characters for more than an episode, that lack of connection mirrors itself into the real world as players don't connect as much to these characters as they were given time to in Life is Strange 1. We lose incentive to make meaningful connections with the side characters because we know from the previous structuring of the episodes that these guys will be gone by the end of the episode, so even if we like them, knowing they'll fade into obscurity by the next episode can make every connection feel pointless. This gives the disappointment felt over the absent main characters of the first game some justification, because those who were willing enough to give this game a chance weren't given that same connection that they felt from its predecessor. This, and the fact that the characters we follow are a part of a minority, which is harder to connect with than teen girls in high school doing kissy high school stuff. But in return, this makes for a more impactful game with more grounded narratives in terms of characterization. Life is Strange 1 gives you a manicured nostalgic fantasy of high school with teen girls solving mysteries and conspiracies and having kisses. Life is Strange 2 brings a heavier drama centered around racism and the bondage of two brothers against the ever-evolving world. Two different games, not a bunch of carryover from either. Additionally, Life is Strange 2 is a much more grounded game than the previous, so I feel players who loved the first game don't get pandered to in the same way in the second season. Aside from the power motif, these two games feel completely distant from each other, but Don't Nod probably wanted to use the Life is Strange title to sell the story better, and because of this, the powers Daniel are given feel more like an afterthought to the game, even if that's not how it actually went down. And I feel how this lack of connection becomes best manifested is in the underutilization of the character of Lila Park. She's Sean's best friend forever, doubling as his wingman, and they have a cute relationship starting from episode 1. By the end of that same episode, after shit's hit the fan, you are given a choice to call Lila before getting rid of your cell phone, as well as an accompanying rewatch of an old family video that was quite tender. I enjoyed that. This phone call gives Sean's one connection back to his home in Seattle, and apart from getting a second chance to call her in episode 2, we don't get to see her again. I get the idea of moving from place to place and that not all relationships with their side characters we meet are going to be permanent, but Lila was such a missed opportunity to give Sean this continued connection to his previous life. Not to mention that phone call in the second episode was such an interesting standstill moment in the series, on par with our conversation with Sean's mother in the fourth episode. She is a very likable character that meant a lot to Sean, especially because of their already established connection, and yet she's never heard from again until the end of the last episode. I understand that practically it was probably a stupid decision to call Lila anyway, because police officers could trace the call and quickly tag on to the tales of Sean and Daniel, but there comes a point when you have to consider the emotional weight of the story over how realistic things would be. And also, why only provide phone calls for the first 2 episodes? The first phone call could be a one-off, because it makes sense that Sean would want to call Lila before tossing his cell phone, but the fact that you're able to go out of your way to call her in the second episode gave me the impression that this would be some sort of achievement. At least that you could call her once each in all 5 episodes. But no, no, that's not the case at all. Lila seemed like such a cool character that Don't Nod kind of just tossed to the wayside and forgot about, and I feel they could have utilized her better for the story than they ended up treating her. And though this rotating cast of side characters did help make the overall plot feel disjointed and hopeless, whether intentional or not, I personally enjoyed exploring the minds of these characters and getting to know them for as little as I ended up doing. It's another one of the reasons why I love Life is Strange in the first place, because these games find a lot of their charm through these slice of life moments that are filled with personal conversations and emotional moments. Now, it's easy to point out the flaws of this game. I mean, I just did, but I can't help but also gloss over what I think Don't Nod did wonderfully this time around.
Hey, I know you're somewhere in here. And if I find you...
For starters, the music and the atmosphere of any Life is Strange game has always stuck with me above anything else. Don't Nod continue to, I'm gonna say it again, Don't Nod continue to nail this manicured, nostalgic slice of life feeling that is accompanied by the warm, acoustic tones of Jonathan Morale, the game's composer. It never ceases to lull me into serenity with these scenes of snow falling in the nighttime, the sun setting on a local desert motel, listening to the wildlife around you in an impossibly saturated forest. It all feels so warm and inviting, and I can't help but reminisce fondly over these moments. And though the side characters that pop up in each episode do feel brief, it didn't stop me from enjoying their company and relating to them even in some minuscule way. Brody was an endearing beacon of hope in the first episode, Cassidy and Finn were welcomed young adults to bring different perspectives to the brothers on the run, and I enjoyed Karen, their mother, the best out of all of them. In episode 4, when Sean reconnects with her at the motel, she spills her guts about why she left them when they were little and opens up about the mistakes she's made and the things she's had difficulty coming to peace with. I couldn't help but relate in some capacity, and it made the entire exchange feel engrossing and cathartic. If I had to say one thing, I wish there was more of a lead-up to it, other than Sean's shallowly blatant angst towards her mother for abandoning the family. But nevertheless, her character, for as little as we see of her, made me reflect kinder to these episodes than I might have otherwise. The game also looks much better than the first. The facial animations are more expressive, the added motion blur gives a nice flow to the character's movements, not to mention added shaders help give certain environments complementing lighting, and overall improve many of the scenes visually. I was also incredibly pleased with the increased amount of endings this time around. In the first game, there was one ending that felt like the, actual ending, and another that felt less produced and included only because there needed to be a secondary option. While each ending in Life is Strange 2 feels equally produced and templated for switching out different cutscenes, I still enjoy that they went for a more customizable ending than in the first, even if they didn't get to me like the proper ending of Life is Strange 1 did. I cried like a bitch when I played it. At the end of the day, they're just two different games setting out to complete two different things. And so if you were hooked by the premise and characters of the first, that might not carry over to the second. I feel that even if many of my points were fixed or improved upon in an alternate reality version of this game, there would still be this stigmatized fanbase who just didn't connect to it because of how little it has in common with the first Life is Strange. Life is Strange 2 is a game where if you're not entirely engaged or have much of a connection with the characters, then the drama of it all falls flat, and the story beats that they were going for just won't work for you. Nevertheless, I personally enjoyed it, and will most likely continue to support Don't Nod on their ventures coming forward in the future. Even though I would love to play Tell Me Why, but it's a PC and Xbox exclusive, and I have the antithesis of that, so I guess I'm kind of screwed. I don't want to watch things unless Jacksepticeye plays it. If Jacksepticeye plays it, I'd watch it. But I'm like, it's just the way things are.
Oh man!
And to close this video out, I want to briefly point out this comment by steadfast_res, who I think perfectly found the words to make sense of the instant disapproval of some fans over Life is Strange 2. At the end of Life is Strange 1, you make a hard choice. For half of the players, this leads to an ending which is a very definitive conclusion to the story. These players were expecting new characters and new story for a sequel. The other half of players got an ending which was a little open-ended about what the main characters would do afterwards. A vocal subgroup of fans in the second group have done fan art and fanfics for years and have never ever accepted that the sequel wouldn't be a continuation of that epilogue. Nothing about what is actually in Life is Strange 2 matters to them. Some refuse to even actually play it. Boom! When I was scrolling through the subreddit looking about what people thought of the game, and I came across this, it felt like such gratification. I don't know if it's my bias, just being angry at people who were immediately dismissive of Life is Strange 2. I love it. It's perfect. I love it. It's beautiful. Frame it on a wall. I love it. Okay. Thank you guys so much for watching. Sorry my voice is so raspy. This is the third time I had to record this video because the first time, the first half was okay, but the second half was just fucked. And then I recorded it a second time just now, and I was using my computer microphone and not the microphone I'm using now. And so my voice is completely thrashed. My arm, my right arm that I'm holding my microphone with, I don't feel it anymore. It's numb. If you have any comments, I'm sure there's a section somewhere on this website that you can go to. But thank you so much for watching. That's the video.